I don't think that I want to speak with Putin. I don't think that I have something to discuss with Putin. And I just want to remind to all the world that Vladimir Putin always lies. That's why I don't think that we need any kind of discussions.
Yulia, it's really lovely to meet you. I sometimes feel bad about interviewing people when they're having to talk about somebody that they love who is no longer here. And you're having to do this so much now in your life and because of this book. Is it sometimes quite difficult for you?
Hello, thank you for having me, and it's great pleasure to be here today. It's a great question. It's not sometimes, it's all the time very hard, but I found it the be one of the biggest part of my job to speak about my husband, to speak about his legacy. It's very important for me that his voice will sound even more loud than it was before. It's very important for me to keep his memory, to remember people that he was killed in Russian prison because just because of his political views. That's why, of course, it's hard. It's hard to remember every day that your beloved husband dead very young, in age 47. He was really incredible man. He was a leader of opposition. He was a big fear to Vladimir Putin, and he was not just my husband. He was not just my partner. He was the outstanding person I knew, and he was a leader, a real leader of democratic Russia.
There is so much that we now find out in the book about your husband and about his life, his early years, his family, how he met you. It's a really, really well-rounded memoir, actually. I was particularly interested in what shaped him and his political views. When he was growing up, Chernobyl and the disaster there actually had a huge impact on his life. And he says in the book that he wouldn't have had the political views that he had were it not to have been for that disaster. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
I think that it's very well described in a book, and all the chapters about his childhood are amazing. And it's true that Chernobyl, he writes that Chernobyl, sorry, put a big impact on his political views and understanding that we need sometimes, when you live in dictatorship countries, to separate the government officials and the people of this country. And Chernobyl disaster was a very good example in it, because all people around were suffering, knew that some kind of very big disaster happened from the other side, like it always happened in Soviet Union, and then in Russia it happened the same. Officials just wanted to keep silence and to persuade people that nothing serious was going on. And it's all the time works like these people, officials, they afraid the explanation of officials that people will behave in the wrong way in such kind of situation, but that's not true. And Alexei writes it in his book, and I absolutely agree that ordinary people are usually very have very good discipline and mobilized very well in such situations. Just the one thing is needed, which is needed to explain them that this disaster is going on and they need to follow some rules in this situation.
So he very clearly saw, even though he was so young, that people were just lying. The officials were just lying about what had happened. And of course, it's the people of Russia, the people around Chernobyl, who then suffered.
of course, and it continues to be like this even now. The same propaganda in Russia is very strong, and propaganda lies to people, but still a lot of people in Russia that they understand that it's propaganda, and they are looking for independent sources of information.
We will obviously talk about his politics throughout the interview, but I also just wanted to talk about him as a young man because he was tall and handsome and clever, not kind of show-offy, top-of-the-class clever, was he? But he managed to get a place at the fabulously titled Patrice Lumumba People's Friendship University of Russia. For people who don't know, Patrice Lumumba was a Congolese politician who was killed by right-wing radicals with the help of the CIA and the Belgians as well. How political was Alexei by the time he got to that university, do you think?
It's difficult for me to answer this question because I met him when we graduated at the university. But me and Alexei, we are from the same generation, and we grow up in the years when the Soviet Union fallen and Russia became the democratic country for several years, I would say. And so we all were our families were very politically involved in everything because we got the a kind of free elections. We got a lot of free media one day. Alexei describes it in his book, and I can share with you that it was the same in my family. There were a lot of discussions. There were new political programs on TV, and we discussed with parents and him and me with our parents at these programs. So when we met and he was 22, we discussed politics a lot because it was like obvious we were living in new democratic Russia and we were very interested in this.
Let's talk about how you met because he describes it so fantastically. It was love at first sight for him, wasn't it? He had managed to get a window seat on a coach. This was on a post-university trip, and he saw you from that window seat on the coach. And he just describes your positivity. You were excited to be going into a hotel, weren't you? And you'd thrown your arms up in the air, just like, wow, I'm here. I'm having a great time. And he decided in that moment that you were the woman for him. What did you think when you first met him?
I liked him very much. As you mentioned, he was really handsome and very nice. The first evening, he was funny from the first words. And I love in people very much when they are joking a lot, when they are funny. It's all the time much more easy with such kind of people.
He says that you are more radical in your politics than he was. Is that true?
Probably once I need to say no, that's false. Because all people all the time asking me this question. I'm sorry, it's a very common question. Because and I understand why you ask, because everyone wants to understand in what field I'm more radical. I don't know. My answer is that probably is, my husband was a politician, and I was following very much Russian politics and was very much involved, but I all the time stood aside. And it's very easy to be radical when you discuss politics on the kitchen. That's why probably I was more radical, because he was a politician who did a lot of interviews. He was who was in the spotlight, and I was discussing with him politics at home, and it was much easier for me to be more radical than he was.
Well, let's talk about those politics then. I mean, his campaigning through his anti-corruption foundation was just so superb, wasn't it? Because actually it was a very simple thing to be able to show the people of Russia the levels of corruption amongst the officials. There are lots of examples in the book. It's a tiny one that stayed with me, Yulia, just about a local official who was only earning $2,000 a month, but your husband was able to show the $5 million Miami apartment that this gentleman owned. When the Anti-Corruption Foundation really established itself and became so successful, what did you think about how that would impact him, you, and by then, your family?
First of all, I want to mention that this man, this official which you mentioned, is not the most richest one.
No.
I would say that he's very poor compared with a lot of other Russian officials. But that's true. It's very common situation, even not like, high-level officials, but also officials sorry, but also officials in local level. They earn millions of dollars. They are able to get villas in Miami. What like it's difficult, I think, to believe in any democratic country that it's so easy.
Yes, and commonplace. But
Yes, it's very commonplace, and so it just very easy picture how corrupt was and is Russian government. Everybody is corrupted, and my husband, as you mentioned, did a lot of investigations, and he was sure that these question about corruption can unite all the people against Putin. And he was right in this, because a lot of people were started to support him when he many years ago started to publish his investigations, not just on YouTube, but just on his blog in Live Journal almost 20 years ago. And he was, as always, very easy and funny in the explanation of this corruption. Because, usually all these anti-corruption investigations, there are a lot of papers, there are a lot of documents, and people don't want to read all this financial stuff. But my husband was able to bring to all the people and to explain this feeling that all these corrupt issues, they are not so difficult. They are just stealing money in very simple, easy way, and it concerns a lot of officials in Russia. That's why he became so popular, because people every day coming to any official places, they face to this corruption in every level, and that's why they supported him a lot.
Yeah. Obviously, he did incredibly well. He stood for election, didn't he, which really shook the Kremlin, because he got 27% of the vote in an election to be mayor of Moscow. It really rattled their cage. He says in the book, the year 2012 set a pattern in my life, an endless vicious circle for many years to come. Protest, rally, arrest, protest, rally, arrest. The Kremlin soon realised that, so in December they brought 4 new criminal cases against me. I'd stolen the timber from the Kirov region, I'd stolen money from the French company Yves Rocher, I'd stolen 100 million rubles from the Union of Right Forces Party, and my favourite, I'd stolen a distillery in Kirov. Now, I'm glad you laughed at that because, Yulia, I mean, this is just
No, it's just
beyond
four. I mean,
farce. It's beyond farce.
I really. I'm not able now to count all the criminal cases which were opened against him, and which were finally brought to the court. So still there were much more, just, all these like criminal cases which were announced by TV or in some kind of government newspapers, and they then never happen. Just, to show people that not something is wrong with him, just for the news.
Yeah, but it is just so bizarre, isn't it? Because those trumped up charges, I mean, they're just not even clever. They just seem so utterly, utterly daft.
As I told you, I don't know if it's clever or not, because still a lot of people watch TV in Russia, and we don't have independent TV, and you are not able to choose which TV channel. You're able to choose TV channel, but any TV channel is about propaganda. That's why when you switch on your TV set and on any channel they say Navalny is still something, people start to believe it's how it works. Because, for example, here in the United Kingdom or in any democratic countries, you are able to choose. If you don't like this channel or this radio, you can just go to another one.
Don't invite people to do that, Yulia, please.
No. Excellent discussion. Please don't switch on to another channel.
I hear what you're saying. Let's move on to the terrible, horrible, dark cloud that then gathers against him, which is a threat on his life, obviously with the poisoning. But I didn't know that you'd been poisoned too with Novichok. Can you talk us through what happened then?
We discovered it several months later, when it was investigation of poisoning of my husband. Because before we just thought that I felt bad. Sometimes it happened with people. But then, while there was investigation about my husband's poisoning, they discovered that these assassins who were following him, they were at the same time when we spent weekend in Kaliningrad. It's one of the cities in Russia on the Baltic Sea. We just one evening I discovered that I feel really bad, and it wasn't any explanation like Alexei writes about his poison. I just felt very bad. But as I mentioned before, we thought, okay, it happens sometimes, but I feel like tremendously bad. And during this investigation, when they realized that they were assassins, we just put these things together, and my husband realized that it could be poisoning me as well.
Yeah. The description of your husband's Novichok poisoning and him falling ill on the plane is really difficult to read. I never met your husband. I'm not, attached to him. It must have been incredibly painful, obviously, for you and your family. But what's so sinister about it, Yulia, is the way that the poisoning, it didn't make him foam at the mouth or have a seizure or something huge. He just felt that his life was just draining out of him. It's an extraordinarily horrible thing to happen to a human, isn't it?
Of course, it's awful. What he describes, I think that he describes it in a very good way, so you can feel like was going on with this human being, and it's awful what was happening with him. But anyway, I think that the most awful thing is about that government can poison their political opponents.
Yeah, for sure. He was definitely saved by Angela Merkel, wasn't he, who came to visit him, and she put the pressure on Putin to allow him to be sent to a German hospital, which undoubtedly saved his life, doesn't
I
it?
am very grateful to Angela Merkel. She put a great effort to save his life, but I couldn't mention also some other um, world officials from Finland, from France. They were very supportive. Also, of course, I want to mention German doctors who did a great job and they saved his life. And of course, the most important, all the supporters in Russia who were on the streets and writing everywhere on social media, asking him to be released immediately and sent to Germany. They helped me a lot.
Mm.
Without them, it wasn't possible. Without their loud voice, it wasn't possible to take him away because at the moment I was in this Omsk hospital. Um, from time to time, it wasn't look like that I would be able to take him from this hospital, and they were trying to keep him in this hospital as long as possible.
Do you still feel supported by the international community?
I still feel supported, not just with international community, with people in Russia as well, and with Russians who are in exile. I feel the big support. A lot of people um, everywhere when where I have a public event or in my social media, I got a big support of a lot of people, Russians and international community as well.
After that poisoning, was there ever a moment where you and your husband sat down and said, enough's enough?
Never. Uh, I knew that in this uh, conversation, after this conversation, he would be unhappy. And he knew that he wants to continue his fight. It was very important for him to show that even after poisoning, he doesn't afraid. He will continue what he have been doing all his life, and he wanted democratic changes. He was a great leader, and he could become a great president of democratic Russia. And as I have already mentioned, I believe to him, not just to my husband. I knew how um, he worked every day. I knew how he studied every day to be better. I knew how open he was to all people around. I knew how he wanted all these changes, and he was ready. It's not about even life, but to sacrifice everything.
But it's quite an ask for you, isn't it? Because you had two children. You were presumably you were bringing them up on your own. He went back to Russia and he was arrested. And I haven't heard you speak very often about the toll that that may have taken just on you. It's a lot to do on your own.
Uh, it's a lot to do. It's all the time very not difficult question. I understand that it looks like it's very difficult, but for me, it wasn't. It never been a choice to ask him this or to say him enough is enough. Um, I wanted to be supported. I was supported, and I hope that this support bring him a lot of strength and a lot of power in his work. And it's not because, again, he's my husband, because we shared the same beliefs. We knew that we need changes in our country, and it happened so that my husband was a leader of these changes.
Much of the book and the last part of the book is obviously about how he coped in prison. And I have to hand it to your husband, Julia, for making the reader smile sometimes, making the reader laugh. It's not what I was expecting from a prison diary. He details how hard it is, of course he does, but there is a remarkable positivity in his writing all the way through. Was there ever a time when that wasn't who he was and what he was experiencing, that actually he told you a different story of just how bloomin' awful everything was?
Um, he was really very optimistic, even in such torturing conditions. And you're right that he describes awful conditions, but he laughs at these conditions, at prisoner guards, and at himself.
He spends quite a lot of time telling us that he really regrets not asking you for salt because he's managed to get hold of tomatoes,
To say the truth,
cucumbers.
it just was 1 month while he was in prison in Moscow. It was much easier, and it was able to send him salt, because after then, that when he was transferred to penal colony, it wasn't possible even to send a salt. But coming back to your question about if he told me something else, because of course our letters probably were more deep even than these prison diaries, but he never regret about these, even in our personal letters. And I miss it a lot. Them, at least, of course, I miss my husband, but I miss these letters because they they gave me a lot of power all these years while he was in prison. So I would say that he was very supportive to me. Of course, to know that your husband is prison, it's not very easy. And the most supportive person around was my husband, who was in prison.
I think the tone of the book is very interesting, Yulia. It wasn't what I was expecting either, because it's not full of a kind of everything can be rosy in the garden if we waved a magic wand of Western democracy or whatever it is, but it is absolutely full of what the heart of Russia should be. And he writes this: I hate Putin because he's stolen the last 20 years from Russia. These could have been incredible years, the sort of period we've never had in our history. We had no enemies, we had peace on our borders, the price of natural resources was high. Putin could have used these years to turn Russia into a prosperous country. All of us could have lived better. And that, I felt, was absolutely the spine of your husband, wasn't it? That belief in the goodness of Russia that has been completely overshadowed by this man. If you sat down with Putin, what would you say to him? And of course, we know it might not make any difference, Yulia, but what would you say to him about exactly that?
Nothing. I don't think that I want to speak with Putin. I don't think that I have something to discuss with Putin. And I just want to remind to all the world that Vladimir Putin always lies. That's why I don't think that we need any kind of discussions.
What will happen to your country? What will happen to Russia? And what needs to be done?
Nobody knows what will happen and when, but I believe in democratic changes one day. It doesn't mean that we need to sit down and to wait this day. For this day, we need to do, everybody needs to do what they are able to do today. And it's history. Um, democratic changes and some changes, any changes are happening in every country. So I just believe that Russia one day, probably it will take years, probably it will happen tomorrow, will become being a democratic, normal country.
Do you worry for your own safety and that of your children?
Not really. Um, I don't think I need to afraid, because when you start living in this feeling every day, waking up um, and thinking that it's dangerous to do what I'm doing, then it, makes a lot of restrictions in your life. It stops you from doing a lot of things, and it makes you thinking about it a lot. I don't want to live in these conditions, looking inside and thinking if it's dangerous or not.
I want to end with something that your husband wrote about actually writing this book, because it properly made me laugh out loud, Yulia, and it would be nice to end the interview on this note, I think. He quotes 4 reasons for writing Patriot. Number 1, I have something to say. Number 2, my agents want me to do it. Number 3, if they do finally whack me, the book will be my memorial. And number 4, if they whack me, my family will get the advance and the royalties that I hope there will be. The book's author has been murdered by a villainous president. What more could the marketing department ask for? Now, I mean, let's not laugh about the appalling, appalling fate that became your amazing husband. But I thought to have the ability to write that, knowing what he was facing, is quite extraordinary, isn't it?
I would prefer he would be sitting here, not me, giving you the interview about this book, and probably you will never, you would never was able um, to mention this episode from the book, because he would just cut it.
Okay. But he's just a remarkable man, isn't he? To be able to see his life from the outside in, to see what fate might befall him, to understand what it would do to his family, but to still want to do something better in the world.
He was great, and he was very beloved one.
What a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much indeed.